Okay, so we are live on YouTube and wish everyone a good evening, a good afternoon, or a good morning, depending upon where you are. And we're so excited to have you back and to join us for many weeks ahead through July. And we just want to, hang on one second. I was hearing an echo of myself on YouTube. Pardon me, it's my first time doing this. So once again, just want to welcome you back. We have the next many weeks and months ahead of wonderful sessions, and a really big thanks to Geraldine Auerbach for all of her organization to make things work, and to many of you who will be participating. So we thought it would be nice to kick off this new season of Conversations on Zoom. The way we kicked things off over 6 months ago with Naomi, Cohn, Zentner, and Eliyahu Schleifer. It really is a great pleasure to introduce two very dear colleagues and really wonderful people to speak on this topic that I'm sure will just be wonderful and stimulating. So we'll turn things over to Naomi and to Eli. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us. Perhaps before we begin, I should put a link in the chat where you can all download the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to be showing you, so that if it's easier for you, if there are things which we skip, if we don't get around to hearing all of the musical examples, if you want to enlarge something, you have the option. And this is courtesy of Professor Eliyahu Schleifer, who did a very big job with scanning and finding sources that no one else can access. And so we think this is something which should be shared by the community and should be a resource which everyone should be able to have access to. So I'm going to pass on the Reshut HaDibur, as they say, to Eli, and then we will start with sharing our presentation. Eli, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Shalom to you all. And thanks very much to Naomi, Cohn, Zentner for really helping, and also putting lots and lots of input into the contents of the of this session. And of course, thanks to Geraldine and Mark for inviting us. I would like to have now the share screen thing. Naomi, can you put on the okay, here we are. Lights and blessings, Ashkenazi chants and music for kindling the Hanukkah lights. We shall center on Hadlakat Nerot shel Hanukkah, on the ceremony, and we shall ask whether there is a nusach for the candle blessings. We'll talk a little bit about melodies for Hanerot Alalu. Actually, in order to save time, we shall not go into this in depth. And then we'll revisit the origins of Maoz Tzur melodies and go into Hasidic melodies for Maoz Tzur. So now the big question is, Mai Chanukah b'chodesh Yanuar. We invented a new Mishnah which says, why do we celebrate Hanukkah in the month of January? Tanu Rabbanan, כיוון שחנוכה הוא חג הסוכות שדחו המכבים מחודש תשרי לחודש כסלו, אולי מותר לנו לדחות את הדיון בחג החנוכה מחודש כסלו לחודש ינואר. Our sages said, since Hanukkah is the festival of Sukkot that the Maccabees postponed from the month of Tishrei, perhaps we are permitted to postpone the study of Hanukkah from the month of Kislev to the month of January. Sorry. ומניין שדחו המכבים את חג הסוכות לחודש כסלו. So the Gemara asks, and how do we know that the Maccabees postponed the festival of Sukkot to the month of Kislev? We know it from the second book of Maccabees, chapter 10, in which it is written, and we go to the next slide. The purification of the temple on the anniversary of the day on which the temple had been profaned by the foreigners, that is the 25th of the same month, Kislev, the purification of the temple took place. The Jews celebrated joyfully for 8 days as on a feast of booths, Sukkot, remembering how a little while before they had spent the feast of booths, Sukkot, living like wild animals in the mountains and in caves, carrying rods entwined with leaves, beautiful branches and palms, lulavim. They sang hymns of graceful praise, the Hallel, to him who had successfully brought about the purification of his own place. By public decree and vote, they prescribed that the whole Jewish nation should celebrate these days every year. So if they celebrated Sukkot 2 months later, we are permitted to celebrate Hanukkah in January. So far about this invented Mishnah, the only thing which is really real and true about it is the quotation from the second book of Maccabees. Now, we're going to discuss, of course, the texts and the music of Hadlakat Nerot, Ner Shel Chanukah, lighting the Hanukkah lights. And of course, as we all know, there are first the blessings, the benedictions for lighting the Hanukkah, and then Hanerot Alalu, that passage that tells us that these candles are sacred and we are not to use them for any other purpose, but for the praise of God on the miracles of Hanukkah. And then there is the poem Maos Tzur Yeshuati. These are the main parts of the Hanukkah ceremony in the Ashkenazi Ashkenazi homes, Ashkenazi communities. There are some additions like Psalm Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid, Psalm 30, and some people say other prayers like Ana Bechoach and various other prayers, but these are the essentials. The brachot for the lighting the candles, Hanerot Alalu, and Maos Tzur Yeshuati.
So this leads us to ask a few questions about the Nerot of Hanukkah. Because we actually, why are we asking even a question about the nusach of the Hanukkah candles? We have a nusach in Ashkenaz for the formula of how we do Birkot HaMitzvot. We have a special bracha for the hearing the shofar. We have a special bracha for Mikra Megillah. And so we have actually, we have a traditional tune for the blessings towards making a mitzvah. Why do we have a special one for Hanukkah? In fact, we could sing the song of Hanukkah to the melody, which we used for hearing the shofar. Or
okay, let's do it.
So let's do that. Could you show us how
Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. Well, this should have been, theoretically, the chant for Hanukkah blessing, but it is not. And Naomi, as you said, it's a good question. I'm not sure that we can answer this completely, but my feeling is that unlike the other mitzvot, like reading the Megillah and listening to the shofar, these were synagogue functions from the very beginning. And they were obligatory for everyone to hear them in the synagogue. One has to hear the Megillah in the minyan. If not, one can hear it privately, but that's not really the mitzvah. And the shofar, certainly, this is part of the high holiday service, and therefore we have the brachot in this manner. But the lighting candles of Hanukkah developed as a home ceremony, and you didn't have to have a minyan for it. You didn't have to go to the shul, and therefore it developed in a completely different way. May I just say that this whole problem of the brachot, the communal brachot, was discussed by Dr. Jeffrey Goldberg in his dissertations and elsewhere, and he has tried to find reasons why certain brachot are done in this manner and others are not done in this manner. We cannot go into his detailed discussion of this thing. But my feeling is that we're talking about a home ceremony, basically. I want to mention that while we're talking about a home ceremony, very early in the Middle Ages, Jews started to light candles in the synagogue as part of the Ma'ariv service of Hanukkah evenings. And we'll have more to say about it.
So maybe we should hear the way that Eastern European rabbis, or maybe something which is characteristic of Eastern European Jews in general, sing the bracha. Maybe we can see an example. For example, we have a video here, and let's see which tune is used by the Eastern European tradition. I'm just going to share it so you can see the video well. It's coming, it's coming. I hope.
Borech ato Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushoni b'mitzvoso v'tzivuni le'adelig Ner Hanukkah Borech to Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'osu nisem la'avoseinu v'yom ha'ei b'zman hazeh.
So there we've heard it. It sounds as
So-
though it's he's a bit all over the place. At the end, he does finish in the major, but he starts off kind of wandering. It's not really a tune or even a proper formula.
Yeah, it looks like he is not sure at the beginning of what he was going to do. So he does it in a kind of conventional way that Hasidim do for various other brachot. And it's not clear. But finally, he gets into a kind of a major mode.
Yeah, in the
And-
very end, we hear major.
Right. But this major mode really is part of the brachot for lighting the candles in the West European tradition, where the nusach is more solid. So let's go into some of the brachot as we have in the cantorial literature.
So what we're saying is that this is an Eastern European tradition, and what we're moving into now is a place of more Western European tradition to try and figure out when Birkot, the brachot of lighting candles, came into the synagogue. We start to see how in cantorial manuscripts and handbooks and printed books later, we have an actual formula, and this is where we're gleaning all of our information about what happened in the Western European synagogues, of course, making it quite musical in a way. Once you put it down in notation and you have a cantor who's singing, he of course wants to make it sound very beautiful. And that is what we have, I think, here. So our first example is from Samuel Naumburg. And Naumburg, what we've done is we've tried to color some of the motifs so that we can see common motifs in the different versions. So we have this yellow motif. Should we sing this? What do you say, Eli?
Yeah, let me sing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivonu להדליק נר של חנוכה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעזון ניסים לאבותינו ביומים ההם בזמן הזה.
Amen.
Okay.
Da, 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 da. The yellow one sounds a little bit familiar to us, right? It sounds as though something that we will hear later on as something which becomes a real sort of crystallized formula of Birkot, the blessings for the candles of Hanukkah, and also da 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 sounds also familiar to us, this green motif. So shall we move on? Now we're going to be hearing the way Maurice Deutsch is his tradition according to the Breslau, the late 19th century.
Moritz Deutsch represents the Western European, that means Central European actually, tradition, but it is a Silesian variant of it, which means that it goes closer to some Eastern traditions. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivonu להדליק נר של חנוכה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשו ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. And from here we go to the Frankfurt tradition by Scheuermann. I sing it a little bit lower. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של Hanukkah. A little bit more elaborate is the one by Oguch, by Fabian Oguch. You have it a little bit lower in the.
Wait. Yeah. I'm getting there. Just a minute. We suddenly got lost. Just a second.
Okay, maybe we should skip it.
No, I haven't reached it yet. Just a minute. I think now I'm going to reach it. Here we go. Oguch.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של Hanukkah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשו ניסים ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. A little bit more elaborate than Scheuermann.
Are we going to move to the Israelis?
Okay,
should we go to Dizahav or should we go to Godfab?
No, we will go to Dizahav. And it is interesting that he preserves. Ephraim Dizahav was the one of the most influential cantors. He was a cantor who was actually the producer of many programs on Jewish music in Kol Yerushalayim, the early radio station, which is now Kol Israel. And he had a tremendous influence. For instance, his Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov has become a symbol of Motzei Shabbat in Israel. And he tried to create an Israeli formula for the brachot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של Hanukkah. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Amen. And pardon my little slips. this did not catch on. Instead, the Israeli blessing, which was common about the 1950s, and was changed very much in the last 2 or 3 decades, was this: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivonu le'adlik ner shel Hanukkah. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Now, this formula is somewhat suspect of having been influenced by the American formula. And the American formula was established by the brothers Goldfarb, Israel and Eliyahu Goldfarb, and it goes Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Hanukkah. Now, this formula is still with us. And sung in America and in other countries which were influenced by this formula of Goldfarb. And please notice, Goldfarb was always suspect of introducing motifs from American songs. As he was suspected of introducing another American motive in the Venemar, Bayom Hahu, the farmer in the dell, the farmer in the dell. But this became part and parcel of the American tradition, and it is still sung in many homes like that. There is a good reason to believe that Goldfarb, who published this set of blessings in 1925, had an influence on other blessings, including the Israeli blessings. But the Israeli blessings changed a lot. And today it begins like the Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and it goes on to Asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Hanukkah. Do we have an example of singing?
Yes, we do.
של חנוכה.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם
So one can summarize a bit the situation. It is quite clear that there were some motives which Chazanim felt were obligatory with the Hadlakat Nerot shel Hanukkah, but the variants were very much, they varied very much from one another. But within the communities, it was quite clear that they had a nusach for lighting the candles of Hanukkah. And I would like to read from Zalman Geiger's Divrei Kehilot, in which he describes the Frankfurt tradition of lighting candles. Usually he describes things in great minutiae. He writes as following. For Mincha, a layman, that means on the eve of Hanukkah, the layman leads the prayer until he ends with Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. At that minute where he ended this prayer, the supreme cantor, he calls him Chazan Elyon, the supreme cantor ascended the pulpit. And after Kaddish Titkabal, he ascended the step before the menorah, and he lifted the burning shamash candle and detached it from the menorah. And while the candle was in his hand, he chanted loudly and with a nigun yadua. Nigun yadua is a term that Zalman Geiger uses for what we call nusach, a traditional melody which is sacred. So he chanted with nigun yadua the benedictions להדליק נר של חנוכה, שעשה ניסים לאבותינו, שהחיינו, etc. And between the benedictions, he sang a nigun nivchar, a chosen melody. A nigun nivchar, according to Geiger, is a melody that the Chazan selects and is free to choose whatever he wants. And we know about these nigunim yaduim from Ber, Aaron Ber, in his little booklet of nigunim, which is largely reproduced in Edelson's 6th volume of the Thesaurus of Hebrew Oriental melodies. In that little booklet, Aaron Ber wrote a collection of Hanukkah tunes to be sung during candle lighting. Most of them are called Waldhorn, and they imitate Waldhorns. That means they imitate the sound of the horn, the hunting horn. And Israel Adler, in his catalog of manuscripts, noted that most of these Waldhorns start with a motive ta-da-da, which he believes is the imitation of Mao's Tzur. So here's one of these Waldhorns to be sung between the benedictions. Yam pam pam param padadam yam pam tadadam tam tadadam tam tadadam yam pam tadadam tam tadadam tadadam, and repeated, and then la 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 tan kaya, la 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 la. This tradition is lost, and people stopped, I suppose, singing Waldhorns in the 19th century already. So it is very interesting that while Zalman Geiger describes very meticulously the ceremony of lighting the candles, he does not mention Maoz Tzur. Neither does he mention Hanerot Alalu. It seems that in the synagogue they didn't sing Hanerot Alalu, and they did not sing Maoz Tzur. But on Shacharit, at the beginning of Shacharit, on the day of the first day of Hanukkah, Adon Olam was sung to the tune of Maoz Tzur. Okay, can we go to the next slide?
של חנוכה.
Here we go.
Okay, so while the brachot were sung in strict nusach, the melodies between the brachot were free and were according to the choice of the Chazan. So this, in short, and we could go into more details about the brachot of Hanukkah, and the answer to the question whether there is or is not a nusach for brachot of Hanukkah is, I'm sorry to say, yes and no. So we move on to Hanerot Alalu. There was no nusach for Hanerot Alalu. People said it in a kind of a Lernsteiger or in some chant, each according to his ability and so on. So you could hear, and you can hear still in some homes, Haneros Madlikim, Alanisim Aniflos, Valgvurs Vatishuas, Valminchobos, Shosis Lorisain, Ubayom Yomas Vanaze, Al Yadei Koyanecha Kadoshim and Kolish, Monazim Hanukkah, Nirisol Alukarishem, the Halo Shusish Tamis by Elo Lirison Bilbot, etc. So it could be in major, or in some Hasidic homes, it could be in minor. Haneros Madlikim, Alanisim, Alanifloes, Valatishuas, Valamchobos, Shosis Lorisain, Ubayom Yomoim, Basmanaze. In a nusach which can be compared to the Haggadah Shel Pesach chants. But in the 19th century, when the synagogue ceremonies developed, music was composed for Hanerot Alalu. And we won't be able to go into many of the compositions of Hanerot Alalu. Let's just hear the Hanerot Alalu that everybody sings and doesn't know that it is a composition by Abraham Tzvi Davidovich, a choir director of the Nozik Synagogue in Warsaw, who was born in 1877 and died, we are not sure where, probably in a Warsaw ghetto in 1942. He was murdered there, I think. And everybody sings this tune. Most of people don't know the second part of the tune, and they just sing Hanerot Alalu Anu Madlikim. Let's hear Excuse me. Let's hear the full composition as it was recorded at the Haifa Great Synagogue, with the Haifa Great Synagogue Choir in 1957, conducted by Yitzhak Heilman. Other tunes, other compositions of Hanerot Halalu, which are quite well known and used by many cantors, are one by Zavel Zilberts, and another one, which since the 1970s became very popular in America and elsewhere, is the one by Baruch Cohn, which starts like a Hasidic tune, and is sung not only in synagogues, but in some churches as well. But I think for the sake of saving time, we will not hear neither this one nor that one, but you have it on your program there, and if you want, you may listen to them. So this, in short, is about the Hanerot Halalu, and we'll have to move on to Maos Tzur. This well-known anthem of Hanukkah, Maos Tzur Yeshuati, and beloved anthem, was written in the Middle Ages, and we'll talk in a minute about when it was written. But first of all, who was the possible poet that wrote? If you look at the poem, you can see that it has the acrostics Mordechai. Each stanza begins with one of the letters of Mordechai. And the question which Mordechai it was. The first thing that comes in mind is the famous Talmudic commentator known as the Mordechai, Ha-Mordechai, born in 1250 and died in the Rindfleisch program in Bavaria in 1298. But as far as we know, he was not the one, but another Mordechai, Mordechai ben Yitzchak Halevi, author of the Shabbat table Mayafit, about 2 generations before the Mordechai. And the time is very, very important because we can identify the time that it was written to the times of Friedrich Barbarossa, the king of the Roman Empire, of Friedrich Barbarossa. The last stanza of Mao Tzu says, can we see the text of the last stanza of Mao Tzu? Naomi, this is it. חשוף זרוע קודשך וקרב קץ הישועה. נקום נקמת עבדיך מאומה הרשעה, כי ארכה השעה ואין קץ לימי הרעה, דחי אדמון בצל צלמון, הקם לנו רואים שבעה. Poets usually ended such poems with chazak, chasof zroa kodshecha in this case. Oh, bear you holy arm and hasten the end of salvation, that is the end of the days and its salvation. Avenge the blood of your servants from the wicked nation, because the exilic time has been too long for us, and there is no end to the evil days. Reject the red-haired king who dwells in the shadow of the crucifix. Raise for us the promised 7 shepherds. The word Admon, Dechei Admon, is based on Samuel 1, referring to David as Admoni, red-haired. The word Salmon is based on Tselem, pronounced as Tselem or Tselom, the common Ashkenazi Hebrew and Yiddish pejorative word for the crucifix. And then Hakem Lanu Roim Shiva is a reference to Micah 5:4, V'akimonu alav Shiv'a Roim, then shall we raise against him, the Assyrian king, 7 shepherds. So we are talking about a red-head king. Who is the red-head king? Friedrich Barbarossa. Barbarossa, the red beard. Friedrich of the red beard. Holy Roman Emperor from 1155 to 1190. So this is roughly the time, or maybe a little bit after his reign, I think during his reign maybe, that Mao Tzu may have been composed. There are some scholars who believe that this last verse was added much later to the Mao Tzu, but I do not believe so. I think, yeah, indeed, in some Sidurim, like Seder Avodat Israel of the authoritative Ber Seligman, does not have this verse. And so it is in other Sidurim. And my feeling is that this verse was an original verse, but because it was offensive to the Christians, it was taken out of the Mao Tzu especially in the 19th century, where they did not want to have any conflicts with the Christians on such matters. But the melody is later. We do not know what exactly the original melody of Mao Tzu was. the melody probably developed around 1450. It is very important to note that the great researcher of Mao's Tzur was Hanoch Avenari. He wrote 2 articles about Mao's Tzur, one in Hebrew in 1967, and another one in 1979 in English. And in these articles, he brought the first version that we know of Mao's Tzur from a manuscript of Solomon Lieben in Prague, 1820-26. We have one earlier version of it in the collection of Hebrew melodies, which was a collection by Isaac Nathan and John Braham, in which they offered Lord Byron Jewish melodies, and he wrote English texts to them. And one of these texts is based on Mao's Tzur Yeshuati. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring it to you because we have the volume in the National Library in Jerusalem National Library, and there's no access now because of the COVID to the library. But the earliest melody with the words of Mao's Tzur is the one that Avenari brought in his article, and this melody goes: Mao's Tzur Yeshuati lecha na'e leshabeach tikon beit tefilati v'sham toda nezabeach leitachin modbeach mitzaram nabeach azegmor b'shir mizmor Hanukkah hamizbeach Hanukkah hamizbeach. It seems that the melody developed in southern Germany, and it had various variants to it, like this one from Scheuermann of Frankfurt. Mao's Tzur Yeshuati lechono el shabeach tikon beis tefilosi v'sham toda nezabeach reis tochin modbeach mitzoram nabeach ozegmor b'shir mizmor Hanukkah's hamizbeach. And various other variants like that. The melody became, so to speak, uniform in northern Germany, and we have it in Bear. Could we see the slide of the Bear's melody? Let's go. Yeah. Mao's Tzur Yeshuati lechono el shabeach, etc. Leis tochin modbeach mitzoram nabeach ozegmor b'shir mizmor Hanukkah's hamizbeach. And of course, there was no repetition, as we do today, of the end of the melody. This became the standard melody in Germany, in most of Europe, and in the United States. And it became also the melody of the translations of Mao's Tzu, especially in the Reform movement. In the Reform movement, there was a big reaction against the words of Mao's Tzu, because they were considered a little bit inhuman. Le'et tachin matbeach mitzar hamenabeach. Instead of talking about the glory of the new temple, we're talking about the massacre among the enemies. And also in the Reform movement, there was a problem about re-establishing the korbanot, the sacrifices, and therefore the Reform movement preferred to sing it in English or in German with a paraphrase of the words. But they sang it to this very melody that we have in Bear. Can we go on, please? This Bear melody was also served in many, many synagogues for Hodu El Adonai Ki Tov on Hanukkah, and for Ana Adonai Oshiana. Hodu Adonai Ki Tov Ki Leolam Chazdo, etc. And also, as I mentioned, the Mao's Tzu melody was used also for Adon Olam, and in some German congregations also for the Kaddish, Kaddish Tistkabal on Shacharit. Let's go on, please. Okay, now, in 1889, Edward Birnbaum, the great scholar, about which our colleague Edwin Sousi, Professor Edwin Sousi, worked a lot with Professor Adler of blessed memory, and he himself wrote about Edward Birnbaum. Edward Birnbaum published an arrangement for piano of Mao's Tzu and wrote a preface. And this preface really is the basis of research on Mao's Tzu until this very day. I've summarized some of his points in the next slide. Can we see the next slide? Naomi? Okay. Mao's Tzu melody is rooted in a German folk song. So weiß ich eins, das mich erfreut, das Blümlein auf der breiten Heide. Thus I know now that which makes me happy, the little flower on the wide meadow. The same melody, says Birnbaum, was used by Luther for a choral, Nun freut euch, lieben Christen gemein, therefore rejoice, O beloved Christian fellowship. Now, I should add that the original melody, the original folk melody, So weiß ich eins, has not survived. We know about it only because Luther and others in the Lutheran Church advised to sing the choral Nun freut euch, lieben Christen gemein, in the melody of So weiß ich eins, das mich erfreut. But the melody itself did not survive. The melody was well known among Jews, says Birnbaum, as early as 1450, at the time Baruch Bendit Auweiler created another Hanukkah anthem and wrote that it should be sung to the melody of Mao's Tzur. Here, I must say that one could question this statement, and Baruch Bendit Auweiler didn't say what exactly was the melody of Mao's Tzur, and perhaps there was an earlier melody for it. Birnbaum continues, the melody was also used for the piyut Shnei Zeitim for Shabbat Hanukkah by Solomon ibn Gvirol. And indeed, this minhag was really observed in some synagogues in Central Europe until the Shoah. And then he also mentions that the melody was first published in print by John Bram and Isaac Nathan and their Hebrew melodies. Now, the poem Shnei Zeitim, Shnei Zeitim is a yotzer, actually a part of Ava Rabbah, which was sung on Shabbat Hanukkah. Can we see the next slide, please? So, Shnei Zeitim by Solomon ibn Gvirol, according to some congregations, it is sung Shnei Zeitim nichrosim begal nor yatziru lerosh kosim ve'efrosim shtei atoros yachtiru mul menoro altoro כמו נרוס יזהירו, הם במחנה אל מנעו פני המנערו יועירו. But most congregations developed another melody, and we have an example of the Elsass melody for Shnei Zeitim, which the first motive is built on the Mao's Tzur, but it deviates from it after that. So, Shnei Zeitim nichrosim beganor yatziru lerosh kosim ve'efrosim shtei atoros yatiru ve'al menaro hatehoro כמו נרוס יצהירו, הן במחנה אל מול פני המנורו יזהירו. So it is interesting that Birnbaum, if you read between the lines of what he says, and I didn't quote everything that he said, you get the impression that he suspected that originally the melody of Mao's Suma or Sur Yeshuati was for Shnei Zeitim, and it was adopted for the text of Mao's Tzur from the melody of Shnei Zeitim. This is not clear. Even Birnbaum was not absolutely sure about that. Now, once this research or piece of research by Birnbaum was printed, a big problem arose. And that is, how come we sing our holy hymn of Hanukkah to a Protestant chorale? Can we hear the Protestant chorale, Naomi?
Und lasst uns fröhlich springen, dass wir getrost und allgemein mit Lust und Liebe
Okay, enough. Thank you. Here. Okay, so many people questioned this kind of a singing of chorale on Hanukkah, and especially since Hanukkah is that festival in which we celebrate the fight against assimilation. Can we do that? The last Chazan who questioned this usage of this Protestant melody was Glantz. We'll talk a little bit about. Glantz wrote an article, Al Chet Shechatanu b'Maoz Tzur, for the sin that we have sinned on in Maoz Tzur. And he says that on Hanukkah we are reminded of our eternal spiritual war against Avodah Zarah, idol worshipping. So here is the well-known melody of Hanukkah anthem Maoz Tzur, and I ask, what is its nature? As is known, it's combined of 3 German songs, 2 German church songs from the 15th century, and 1 German folk song from the 16th century. He was not so accurate about the details. The Christian intelligentsia surely scorns us for our adoption of their heritage to uplift the glory of our national holiday. On the other hand, the outwardly anti-Semites are surely angry on this blatant plagiarism of ours, and we continue to do our own thing, sinning thereby to the source of Israel. Therefore, Glantz continues, to my opinion, we need to create a melody, a new melody for Maoz Tzur, which will be built on the original and traditional nusach of Hanukkah. I offer to the general public, and especially to the teachers, to the cantors, to the singers, etc., this modest creation, which is based on the above-mentioned foundations. And he says that the rhythmic and the melodic structure are typical for the festival of Hanukkah, and they contain nothing strange and no imitation of strange cultures. Let us endeavor to learn and teach this melody. So our dear Naomi Cohn Zentner has endeavored, and she's going to sing this Glantz melody for Maoz Tzur.
I'll try. Maoz Tzur Yeshuati lecha na'eh leshabeach תיקון בתפילתי, ושם תודה נזבח, לעת תכין מטבח, מיצם נבח, אז אגמור בשיר מזמור, חנוכת המזבח. Lots of nusach there, isn't there?
No
Where's
nusach.
all the original nusach he's talking about? So all these original, traditional.
Yeah, in addition to that, the rhythm, tam, pa, pam, pam, ta, 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 tam, pam, is borrowed from the Polish mazurka, and actually the Polonaise are also in this kind of rhythm. So it is not necessarily a solution for the problem that he raised. And what he did actually was to build a melody on the Hasidic melodies of Maoz Tzur. And the Hasidim have a whole lot of melodies for Maoz Tzur. In fact, the rabbis encouraged the musicians to write, to create melodies for every year. So we have a whole slew of melodies for Maoz Tzur. Here's one of them, Yevanim Nikbetzu Alai, by the Boyan Hasidim. Now, this kind of melody is a jolly dancing melody which reflects the joy of Hanukkah. And we shall see that there is another way of creating Hasidic melodies for Maoz Tzur. So here's Yevanim Nikbetzu Alai, Boyan Hasidim.
יבונים יבונים נקבצי עולה, יעזר דברי חשמנים, ויבולצי חיימש בגדולה, ודין מכל הזמנים, ודין מכל הזמנים, דין מכל יצחק קנקנים, נעשוני תזשנים, ונאי בינו ימי שמוינו, לא בשיר אנונים, ונאי בינו ימי שמוינו, לא בשיר יבונים נקבצי עולה, יעזר דברי חשמנים, ויבולצי חיימש בגדולה, ודין מכל הזמנים, ודין מכל הזמנים, אם מינו יצחק קנקנים, נעשוני תזשנים, ונאי בינו ימי שמוינו, לא בשיר אנונים, ונאי בינו ימי שמוינו, לא בשיר אנונים.
So and they repeat it many times, and each time the tempo gets faster and faster. Now this is one way of composing melodies for Maoz Tzur. A completely different way is a kind of through composed melody in which each stanza gets its melody, sometimes a recitative, sometimes a jolly melody, and within its stanza, each line gets its melody. And the melody reflects the atmosphere of the words. So here is a melody of the Hasidim of Bohush singing Maoz Tzur Yeshuati. Naomi, can you comment a little bit about this melody? You have to.
Yeah. The Bohush Hasidim have this beautiful, very elaborate melody. In a way, it's almost, it does sound through composed, but when you analyze it more, it's very clear that there is a structure, an ABCB kind of structure. And each section of this very long piece, of course, each chorus, which is connected to a different strophe of the text, has a very different atmosphere. It's almost a kind of giving a real sense of what the feeling of the words should be. For example, when we get to the strophe of Ra'ot Sav'a Nafshi, of the bad things which my soul has suffered regarding the Pesach, it was the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim and Egypt. So suddenly there's kind of a sadness which comes into this whole, what was previously quite a joyous Hanukkah Mizbeach kind of a tune, and we can hear this shift in mood in this piece we're going to hear. This is a recording from 1992, and it's actually happening. You hear the entire community singing this Maoz Tzur, the Bohush Hasidim. So we're going to hear this shift in mood from the very festive, happy Maoz Tzur strophe to the Ra'ot Sav'a Nafshi, which is kind of a more subdued, sad kind of a atmosphere. So I'm going to share this with you. Just a minute. Just moving on a little bit. אז אגמור בשיר מזמור. So we can even hear kind of a word painting. So we're speaking of the suffering, the sadness, and ra'otz of anafshi, and there's really a sense of kind of mourning. And we have also this festive uvyado agdola. And so in a way, we have kind of this shift between happiness and sadness, between what the music is kind of alluding to emotionally, very much closely related to the text. And this is a very Hasidic notion of having kind of, it's not really through composed, but it is definitely trying to suit and fit the atmosphere of the music to the emotional atmosphere of the text. Back to you, Eli.
Okay. Following the Hasidic ideas of Mao Tzu, the many cantors, Eastern European cantors, composed melodies for Mao Tzu, and I just should mention the beautiful melody of Pinchik for Mao Tzu. Can we hear just the beginning of it?
Hanukkah. Bashir Mizmoy Hanukkah
Okay, let's stop here. We don't have time to listen to the entire thing, unfortunately. Many cantors, as I said, mentioned, wrote recitatives recitatives for Mao's Tzu, and I should mention the recitatives of Israel Alter, among others, in which he tried to depict the words through the Chazanut. We have some other examples, but I wanted to offer my little contribution to Mao's Tzu in Hasidic klezmer style, which goes like this. Mao's Tzu Yeshuvati Lechana Leshabeach Kon Beit Tefilati Vesham Toda Nezabeach Leitachin Madbeach Mitzaharam Nabeach Azegmor Beshir Mizmor Chanukah Mizbeach Yevanim Nikbetzu Alai Hazai Mimei Chashmani Mufatzuch Komot Migdalai Vetim Kol Hashemanim Umin Notar Kankanim Nasanes Lashoshanim Bnei Vina Yemei Shmona Kav Ushir Renanim. So here is another a little contribution of mine to the first style of the of Hasidim. That means not the elaborate style, but the more joyful style of Mao's Tzu. In summary, I want to return a little bit to the traditional melody of Mao's Tzu, and that is the, so to speak, Protestant melody. Hanocha Venari, in his wonderful articles on Mao's Tzu, he compared Mao's Tzu with many manuscripts which are found in Bohemia and in southern Poland. And there one finds the motive in usually in credo melodies, in local credo melodies of the 15th century and 16th century, in what they used to call cancional. Cancional were kind of Gregorian chants written or composed in a more local and folk-like melody. So here is the Patrem Omnipotentem. Patrem Omnipotentem Factorem Celi et Terrae. And then it goes on, Visibilium, Omnium, etc., etc. And then Deum de Deo, Deum de Deo, Lumen de Lumine, Deum verum de Deo. So there are some clear relationship to Mao's Tzu. And Avenari concludes that the motive of Mao's Tzu was common in the late 15th century or maybe even earlier, in this, to all cultures around Bohemia, southern Germany, and in southern Poland. And so the Jews used this melody, and the Christian used this melody. Everybody used this kind of melody. And all in all, if you are very meticulous about it, only the 7 first notes of the Maus Tzur melody is somehow related to the Protestant chorale. So I think that the Maus Tzur melody is kosher enough for us to use on Hanukkah. Use it Gesundheit next Hanukkah, and don't worry about it a bit. On behalf of Naomi and myself, Toda Rabba for listening.
It's fantastic. So thank you both for giving us such a wonderful presentation and so many wonderful variations and things that we should worry about and that we shouldn't worry about. So there are a couple of questions. Naomi, do you want to deal with them yourself or do you want me to? I know that Isabel Gantz wanted to make a comment. Are you still there, Isabel? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to know why the earlier chants, which were so totally arrhythmic, were notated with bar lines. Because there is no rhythm in those early chants. Until you got to Goldfarb and the Germanic tunes, there was no rhythm.
Yeah, but in the 19th century and early 20th century, you had to present melodies in rhythm. Actually, the most important thing to do was to present a free recitative in 4/4 time. Lewandowski did that, many people did that. The understanding was that, you know, the Chazanim are taking their liberty and don't sing it exactly like that, these 4/4. But until the beginning of the 20th century, it was very important that you present things in a civilized manner. And a civilized manner means you write it in 4/4s.
Thank you. Benny wanted to talk about Glanz. Benny Meissner. Are you there, Benny? Maybe he's, because he grew up with Leibel Glanz in Israel, and he wanted to say something, but maybe he's had to leave. Naomi, do you want to say anything, or?
Maybe Malta, who mentioned something about one of the sources, that they're not from the time we think they are. Malta, would you like to elaborate?
Yes, just a short comment. Because Ellie, you mentioned that the one of the earliest sources of the Maus Tzur from the Liban manuscript from Prague from the 1820s, but this is because I worked a lot with these manuscripts by Liban, and actually these are transcriptions from the 1930s, which Sigmund Schul, a young composer, he did. He transcribed the repertoire sung by Salomon Liban. And somehow, I don't know, Avenari, I think at that time, and when he wrote the article, he was just, or there is a copy in Jerusalem. I think he worked with this copy, and he had contact to the State Jewish Museum in Prague, who gave him some information about this manuscript, which the original is in Prague, and I guess that's or they're obviously in Prague. They didn't know very well the context of this this collection, and so in secondary literature we find this from time to time that Avenary and also in other articles there is the impression that it's an older or a copy of a very old or even medieval manuscript, but this is not the case. However, like because the manuscript is, or these transcriptions are from the 1930s, but of course it doesn't tell us anything about the age of the melodies. Is just this source. So.
Thank you for the correction. It's very, very important because you are there sitting on the treasure of Liban and so on. So it's very. Hanoch Avenari apparently believed that this was the earliest version, and especially since it has this kind of minor digression towards the end. Which is not common in the other melodies. And he said in his article that too bad that it was the melody was too much standardized, and we don't have the earlier variations that the Solomon Lib melody represents. So thank you for the that's very important addition, correction.
Thank you, Marta. I don't see any other questions. If anyone wants to mention or go right in the chats, it seems to me that we're...
Niels Fach also had something to say about Birnbaum and the folk song. Niels?
Mr. Schleifer already said this in the presentation, so I have nothing to add to this.
Great.
Geraldine, can I ask something, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Ellie, thank you for an absolutely fascinating presentation. With regard to the melodies, to the brachot, in our family, we always used to sing one, which you might be familiar with, but I'd like to know from you and others whether it is sort of a well-known tune. And it goes like this. I'll just sing the first part, but you'll be able to catch on to it. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner Hanukkah. Now, is that a well-known tune to one of the?
It's actually a variant of what they sing now in Israel. It's a variant of this. Which one came first, I don't know. But I know that the variants like that exist. The beginning is exactly like that. And then you have the Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav, which it varies from the other melodies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, may I add something, Geraldine?
Of course.
I've been listening to all these various versions, and surely an essence of Nusach is that it is variations on a mode, on a theme. I'm often criticizing people who think the Cohn is the only way to do it. They think that Nusach is a tune, not Nusach. And so I find that this discussion of these niceties of whether one note in a whole series is the same or different is a bit far-fetched. And I think the element of Nusach is that you have the same theme. The end of the brachot is either da 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 da, da 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 da, or da 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 da. But so what? And there are various, it's either up or it's down. But I think that we're talking in too much detail. Perhaps I'm being a bit of a Philistine, but it seems counterproductive to analyze each melody to such an extent, whereas they have common factors, and that is nusach.
I think it's interesting to think of this because in a way, perhaps when it was happening in people's domestic sphere in their home, there were more, and we see there are more variations. And in the late 19th century manuscripts and printed sources, we find a wide variety, as you say, of everyone doing the same kind of genre, getting to the same anchor point at the end, but each one in their own different way. I think what we're discussing is how there's a process of musicalization as soon as it becomes part of the synagogue and cantors try to beautify it. So certain parts of this nusach, as you say, rightfully, become crystallized and they become like fossils. They become set. And there are two, right now in the world, there are more, but around two main crystallizations of this nusach. And there's an American version, which we saw in Goldfarb. There's an Israeli version, which we saw an example of. And these have become kind of the only way, the same way that you say, there's only one way to do it, where there was a wide plethora of many musical examples which are part of the nusach, which we know of, which have kind of slowly become sort of flattened. And now there's sort of only one correct or there's one standard way to do it, and we've lost a certain wealth of different ways of improvising within the nusach. And so what we're saying, I think, is that these two different branches of a set way in which the nusach of Birkot Hadlakat Haner have been standardized as something which is happening in the world. And I agree with you that this is kind of maybe more a fluid nusach, which has become set. Does this in a way, anyway, answer your question? Eli, maybe you want to comment on what I said.
No, I agree 100%. I mean that nusach is a kind of a flexible entity, and but it has its roots in a kind of a tradition that people understood from a very early age. Let me put it in this way. I mean, cantors started to learn their cantorial music in the synagogue at a very early age, and they became apprenticed to a cantor, and they would learn from that cantor the nusach. However, they were expected, even by the cantor, which was their teacher, to show some independence and to be able to sing in a somewhat different way, in some kind of a variation. And therefore, there were many variations. Of course, there were also local variations to nusach, many local variations, and also individual variations of nusach. However, the feeling of nusach was within the community. The community couldn't analyze the nusach, or couldn't analyze what the chazanim sang in any way or shape. But as the minute the chazan deviated from the nusach, everybody knew that something is wrong. So somehow the people absorbed the idea of the borders of the nusach, and this was lost during the ages. We have a completely different way of teaching these. First of all, we have the schools, and when you are in the school, you have to learn the nusach according to Kachko and according to Alter and so on and so forth, to Neiman, and this gets in a way petrified. The nusach becomes petrified because of that. And also, since people don't know exactly how the nusach works and where it can be flexible and where it cannot be flexible, they're afraid to move left or right from a fixed melody. So we see more and more people who know the correct nusach, and they know that it's exactly these notes, and you cannot deviate from them. However, one thing should be said about motives within the nusach. the knowledge of the Nusach by early Chazanim was the knowledge of motives and the intuitive knowledge of the scales. They didn't know any theory about scales, they didn't know nothing, but they had an intuitive way of understanding how you move around the Nusach. And therefore they could be much more flexible than what we do today in the Nusach, and yet not to lose the entire ambience and spirit of the Nusach. So if that is a partial answer, I would be.
It's a partial answer, but I think you're taking away the art of the Chazan. If you're just saying to somebody who should sing what's written on the page, and that is Nusach, that's one thing. But a great Chazan will not just sing what's on the page. So Nusach has wide parameters.
You're right. You're right. I must tell you that the first culprit in this area is Lewandowski. He wrote the Nusach in a masterful way. I would say he was a great artist of the Nusach. But because he wrote it in such a way that you cannot move one note from its place, and you have to present the Nusach in exactly the same way that he wrote it, he, in a way, did damage to the cantorial creation, the cantorial improvisation. On the other hand, I must tell you, when I sing a piece of Nusach by Lewandowski, I'm not talking about the choral pieces, but the Nusach pieces that he has in his books, it's a great pleasure to sing it like that. But then you are confined within the Lewandowski style, and that's it. You cannot move from
Well,
it.
I think a lot of his music was written for choir. You can't have people improvising when they're singing in the choir. But you have a piece
we're
like
not talking about
Kika
choral.
Shimcha.
No, we're not talking about the choral pieces.
Fine.
We're talking about, he wrote lots of Nusach pieces within his Kol Rinau Tfilah, and also with his Todah and Zimra. These are one voice pieces, not choral pieces at all. And there he presented the Nusach as he understood it. But it is very difficult if you want to do any kind of improvisation. Even in the piece that he wrote in Eastern European style, the Kika Shimcha, God help you if you change one note from that piece.
Who says that?
Well, I say
if somebody is standing in the shul singing Kika Shimcha and you change the note, so what?
Okay, go ahead. Do it.
Jonathan Greenstein, did you want to say something? Jonathan, you've got your hand up. Would you like to unmute?
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm on my way to my COVID. I just wanted to mention Lewandowski because he has the most beautiful set of brachot for Hanukkah. I don't think Professor Schleifer mentioned it, or did he? Or maybe I missed it.
I didn't hear who you mentioned.
Lewandowski's brachot for the Hanukkah candles.
The video.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I know them, really.
Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Is this fourth to the third the whole time?
It's not in his books.
Yes, sure. It is. It's at the back.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with it, and
our shul always used it.
I'll learn them.
Our shul always used the Lewandowski's brachot. It was absolutely beautiful.
Okay, good to know. I know quite a few of the Lewandowski recitatives, but this one, I admit, I'm not.
Okay, I'm going for my injection now. Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Daniel Kess.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Yeshar Koach Hachem. That was fascinating. I have a question about Nusach. In a couple of the examples you showed at the very beginning, I thought I noticed a few other motives for Shalosh Regalim, such as da dam bam bam, and reminiscent of Akdamut, la da 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 dam. So my question is, do we have any evidence connecting Hanukkah to Shalosh Regalim, that there's some other, or was some other usage of Nusach that we don't have anymore?
Do you mean that these motives were used in Shalosh Regalim?
Well, that's what I'm asking. I saw a couple of motives that looked like Shlosh Regalim motives in examples you showed. So I'm wondering, was there at some point somewhere a tradition that put Hanukkah into the realm of Shlosh Regalim, the way Rosh Chodesh is? Okay.
No, I'm not aware of it. I know that of course, the Hallel was sung in Shalosh Regalim Nusach, or close to it.
Sure.
On Hanukkah, as it was sung on other holy days, but I am not aware of other connections from the brachot of Hanukkah to Shalosh Regalim. Maybe we should research that, and maybe we'll find some connection. I really am not aware of that. I don't know.
You really connected it to Sukkot. So, Malcolm Miller, you wanted to say something about Bertolt Goldschmidt.
Actually, I've changed my question. No, that was another. Thank you very much. This is really fascinating. I mean, you're talking about the origins. I mean, one thing that one could say about Mao Tzu is there is a sort of an iconic status. It somehow has been absorbed by certain composers anyway into their art music. That was the one example came to my mind, was the emigre composer Bertolt Goldschmidt, who fled in 1935 from Germany and came to London, but was invited back to Germany in the 1980s, and wrote a string quartet which he quotes Mao Tzu. He's not, let's say, it wasn't part of, it was sort of a cultural, Jewish cultural symbol for him, and it's used in a programmatic way. So that was my question about that, but it sort of plays in. I just had a question from earlier on, which was,
it's not a question.
It's a comment. It's a little comment, but what I wanted to, well, the question was, what happens if you get rid of the, as it were, we're moving away from that melody, and that was a bit of a speculative question. But actually, I had a question earlier on. You talked about the Waldhorn. Is it the sort of fanfare type of motif that would be sung in between the brachot? And
right, yes.
My sort of question that occurred to me was, the character of the Mao Tzu has a certain sort of march, has a march-like flavor, this particular melody, and there's something about it which might suit the story. Is that something that you can comment on? Maybe the Maccabees, there's a sort of military element which is underplayed by the rabbis in the Talmud, because we're looking for the spiritual meaning, but there is still this element of the band of Maccabees. Do you think there's something to do with them? Does it play into this?
It's an idea. I have never explored it. I never looked into it. It's an idea. But basically, the making Hanukkah as a Maccabee festival of vigor and national strength and so on is the Zionist revolution about this holiday, which in the tradition was not really emphasized so much. Of course, in the Al Hanissim prayer, you say that the Maccabees, who were few, really won the war against the many, and so on. But the motive was not that the Maccabees were the great heroes, but God was the great heroes. He made them victorious, and so God is the same. But in the Zionist idea, the Maccabees became the heroes, And many songs, Zionist songs that we still sing in Hanukkah, are really anti-religious. For instance, Mi Yemalel Gvurot Israel, the famous Mi Yemalel Gvurot Israel Otam Mi Yimne by Menashe Ravina. The very first words are I would say a stab in the religious idea of Hanukkah, because the original verse was taken from the Psalms, and it says, Mi yemalel gvurot Adonai yashmiya kol tehilato. And here it was turned into Mi yemalel gvurot Yisrael instead of Adonai. And so this, the Zionists try to secularize and secularize the holiday and make it a holiday of the what Wolfson or before him, the Zionist leader called the Judaism of the muscles, and it was a far cry from the religious ideas of. Now we sing all of these songs in a synagogue, but they were not meant to be part of a religious worship of Hanukkah, but rather than part of a civil worship, Zionist worship of the power of Israel.
Thanks. That's really interesting.
Oh, so you wanted to ask about a Rabbi Seymour Rockoff. Do you want to?
Yes, thank you. Yashikoyach to Dr. Schleifer and Naomi. Is just fantastic presentation.
And to Naomi Cohn Zentner, of course.
Yes, of course, and to Naomi as well. Thank you. So my question is, in the 80s, we had in the States, I think he was based in White Plains outside New York somewhere, Rabbi Seymour Rockoff. And I'm asking if anybody remembers him. He was tremendous. He was a rabbi. He published a book. I have his volume. He was an entertainer. He was a comedian. He was a rabbi. He was a chazan. He was brilliant. And he has in this book an English version of Ma'atzor, a clever translation. He says, it begins, rock of my security, to praise you is a pleasure, which is metrical and an exact translation. He says, rock of my security, to praise you is a pleasure. It goes on like that. The guy is brilliant. There's a whole book of brilliant, brilliant songs. And all I'm asking is, does anybody know
what's the name of the book? What's the name of the book?
I don't know. The author, I can't remember. I have to dig it upstairs. I have to find it. Rabbi Seymour Rockoff, R-O-C. I put it in the chat, but nobody looks. Rockoff, R-O-C-K-O-F-F. And I'm asking if anybody knows. He was brilliant. He had a CD. Everybody, no, in those days there was no CD. In the 80s, you bought his cassette tape. He was an entertainer. He went all over like New York State and the Catskills, and I'm asking. All I'm asking is, what happened to Rabbi Seymour Rockoff? Who knows? Who's out there who knows? Am I the only person who remembers Seymour Rockoff? He was brilliant. And you can't, in the old days, you'd go to Levine's bookstore in Manhattan to buy a copy. Well, now Levine, there's no bookshops anymore. You show me a Jewish bookshop. Every bookshop doesn't exist. There's no such a thing as a Jewish bookshop anymore. You know that. So anyway, so you tell me, who knows out there? Come on, Chevro, tell me, what happened to Seymour Rockoff?
Charlie, I know of Seymour Rockoff.
So what happened to him? No? So
Charlie,
where is he
I've
now?
got Seymour Rockoff's name on the top of one of my pieces of music that I sing, either myself or with the choir.
So
and I don't remember what the piece is, but I'll look it up and I'll let you know.
What happened to him? So who was the last person who ever saw a sighting of Seymour Rockoff?
Okay, we'll
have
in the
the
flesh.
last person who ever sang his music. Then.
Jesus. You didn't hear me
I'll look
say
it
that.
up.
Okay, that's
all right.
wonderful.
Does somebody do a PhD? What happened to Seymour Rockoff? God, Gavalk. Okay.
Anyway, there's so many avenues and thoughts and ideas that this has sprung off just from a simple suggestion like this. So it's been a really fascinating presentation. Naomi, thank you so much for organizing and fixing and making those wonderful slides, which we did have the link to at the very top of the chat if anybody wants to download that. And it's really been a super...
Thanks to Naomi. Without Naomi, it could have not happened.
It's definitely, you are a double act and a perfect double act, and we really like that very much. So we're looking forward to opening the autumn season, which we're not starting yet. So think of a topic for the autumn season. But in the meantime, we just want to thank you so much. You've all got lists of what's coming next. Next week, we have... it's Yelda and Jackie, isn't it? We're back on the Nusach trail. So we'll be really looking forward to that. And let me find the document that I'm supposed to have open so I can tell you all these things. That's on the 26th, Yelda Rebling and Cantor Jacqueline Chernett, the first ordained cantor in the UK. And their subject is Nusach with Kavanah. And on the 2nd of February, Baruch Cohn and Jonathan Morgan, who is the great-great-grandson of A.Z. Edelson, is giving a talk about the book he's written about him. They're discussing that, The Fish and the Phonograph. But I will keep sending you, what's coming. You should all have had the newsletter, which has got it all in Technicolor. If you haven't, send me an email and I'll make sure that you get it. And if there's anything else, if you want to give your own COZ, I think we've got a couple of dates, maybe in June or July. But it's great to see that so many people, this is such a special forum where we can discuss all these things in detail. This is where, in your daily life and in synagogue, you have to just go with what you've got. But here, we can tear them all apart and tease them apart and look in detail at everything. So it's such a special pleasure. So thank you to Mark and to Joanna at UCLA and to Martha, who has now got a new position in Dresden, but she's still with us. And I'm glad to say that Edwin Sarusi said Martha is correct. The information appears in the card of the Jacob Michael collection at NLI, and he revised the manuscript a couple of months ago while working on Ma's. So everything, scholarship is very up to date on this topic. So thanks again to Naomi and to Ellie, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, I would just like to mention, you mentioned Edwin Sarusi's contribution, and I must say he has a wonderful lecture that he gave, and I hope that this is also would be available to the members about Mao's Tzur, which he sees other aspects of Mao's Tzur which we didn't touch upon.
Well, that's very good. Will you be pleased to know he listened into our talk today? Edwin was with us. So
Wonderful.
That's good. And I'll ask him about his talk and where we can find it. Yeah. So Mark, do you want to add a final wave to goodbye?
Thank you. Look forward to doing this every week and being together. And we're off to a great start and such wonderful, rich research, Ellie and Naomi. We're really very grateful.